Welcome to Echoes of the Midnight, a channel where every whisper hides a haunting truth. Sit back, turn off the lights, and let the midnight tales pull you into their chilling embrace. The question is, can you make it to the end?
Christmas Eve was supposed to be a time of peace. But as the snow gently fell outside, Emily felt an unsettling sense of unease. The fireplace crackled, casting soft shadows across the room where her husband, John, and their two children, Henry and Ella, were gathering around the tree. The warmth inside contrasted with the biting cold outside. The doorbell rang. It was a strange time for visitors. Emily glanced at the clock. It was almost midnight. She hesitated for a moment before walking over to the door. Her heart raced. Was it a late-night caroler? Or perhaps someone lost in the storm? When she opened the door, a tall man stood in the snow, his figure shrouded in darkness. His clothes were tattered, and his eyes seemed deep and unreadable. "I need help," he said, his voice trembling, almost as if he had been traveling for days. "My car broke down. May I stay here until the storm passes?" Emily's instincts told her to be cautious. She looked back at John, who frowned but nodded. Let him in. The stranger stepped inside, his presence oddly overwhelming. His dark eyes scanned the room, never resting on one spot for too long. He said, but his voice carried an unsettling edge. As he settled near the fireplace, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The house felt too small, too warm, for the cold energy he brought with him. He stared at the fire, his face unreadable. Then, as if on cue, the lights flickered, casting a momentary shadow across his face. The stranger's eyes gleamed briefly, too briefly, as if something was hiding beneath the surface. Emily glanced at John, who seemed equally uneasy. But neither of them spoke. They couldn't. And the night, so full of promise, began to feel more like a trap. The storm outside raged harder as the hours passed. Emily couldn't shake the eerie feeling that had settled over the house. The stranger sat in front of the fire, his face partially hidden in shadows. His gaze never strayed from the flames, but his presence seemed to warp the air around him. It felt like he didn't belong here, not just in their home, but in the world itself. John noticed it too. "He's been quiet for too long," he whispered to Emily. "Maybe we should ask him to leave. Something's off." Emily nodded, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. There was something unsettling about the man. His silence was more unsettling than anything. It was as if he wasn't entirely human, as if his mind was elsewhere, always drifting. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the house. The lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She could hear nothing but the wind howling outside. "Stay calm," John said, his voice strained. He stood, fumbling for the flashlight. "I'll check the fuse box." But as he turned to leave, the stranger stood up in one swift motion. His dark eyes gleamed in the faint moonlight filtering through the windows. "Where are you going?" the stranger asked, his voice colder than before. "It's not safe to leave." "Not yet." Emily froze, the air thick with tension. Something was terribly wrong. Before she could respond, she heard a soft whisper, almost a hum, coming from the stranger. It was barely audible, but it sent chills down her spine. "You've invited me in. And now, there's no turning back." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She tried to move, to run, but her feet felt glued to the floor. The house seemed to close in around her, as if the walls themselves were tightening. And then, for the briefest moment, the stranger's face changed. His eyes no longer gleamed, they glowed, red as fire. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as the stranger's eyes burned red, casting an eerie glow across the room. She tried to take a step back, but it was as though an invisible force held her in place. The air felt thick, heavy, almost suffocating. The stranger's voice was low, almost a growl. "You thought you could save me, but you don't understand. I've been waiting, watching." John, still holding the flashlight, turned slowly. "What are you talking about?" His voice was shaky, but he stood firm. He had to protect his family. The stranger's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're too late." He took a step closer, and the temperature in the room dropped, causing Emily to shiver. "I've already been invited in. And now, you're mine." Suddenly, the lights flickered back on. But the room wasn't the same. The shadows seemed deeper, darker, and the fireplace, once warm and inviting, now felt cold, unnaturally cold. Emily's mind raced. What had they let in? Who was this man, really? Without warning, the stranger lifted his hand, and the door slammed shut with a deafening crash. Emily jumped, her pulse quickening. The house had become a trap. "Tell me the truth," Emily shouted, her voice cracking. "Who are you? What do you want from us?" The stranger's gaze softened for a moment, but only for a brief instant. "I am not what you think," he whispered, his voice laced with sadness. "I am an old soul, trapped between worlds. I feed off fear, pain, awe, and hope." John's grip on the flashlight tightened, his knuckles turning white. "You're not human. You're a demon." The stranger's smile widened. "Not a demon, but something worse." He stepped forward, and the temperature dropped even further. "I am an ancient being. I have no name, only purpose. And my purpose is to bring the darkness." Emily's stomach twisted as the truth sank in. This wasn't just a lost traveler. They had let a malevolent force into their home. And it was too late to escape. The room was suffocating, the shadows now alive, stretching across the walls as if reaching for them. The stranger wasn't a lost soul or a tired traveler. He was something far worse, something older, darker. John's voice broke through her panic. "We need to get out of here. Now." He grabbed her hand, but she pulled away, her gaze fixed on the figure in front of them. The stranger's red eyes burned like fire, and he stepped closer, his movements unnervingly smooth. "There's no escape," he whispered. "I am everywhere now. Inside these walls, in your thoughts. Your fear fuels me." Emily's chest tightened as the walls seemed to close in. It felt as though the house itself was alive, groaning and shifting with a malevolent pulse. She could hear whispers now, soft, unintelligible voices that seemed to echo from every corner. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the stranger. "What do you want from us?" she managed to choke out. He smiled again, that same chilling, empty grin. "I want nothing from you, Emily. I am here to take what is mine. I've been waiting for years, and now you've invited me in." Before she could react, the temperature dropped even further. The windows fogged over, and a cold wind whipped through the room, blowing out the candles. The shadows grew darker, taking shape, twisting, contorting into terrifying forms that seemed to whisper her name. "Run!" John shouted, grabbing Emily's arm. But as they turned toward the door, it slammed shut with a force that made the entire house shake. Emily's heart raced as she looked at the stranger. "What do you want from us?" she repeated, her voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he raised his hand, and the shadows in the room surged forward, closing in around them. Emily felt a cold grip on her wrist, pulling her toward the darkness. She screamed, struggling to break free, but the more she fought, the stronger the pull became. "We're not going to make it," John said, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "But we have to try." Emily's mind raced. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to stop this. But with every passing second, the house seemed to grow more oppressive, more alive with darkness. And then, in the midst of the struggle, she remembered something the stranger had said. "You've invited me in." If they had let him in, maybe they could force him out. The shadows closed in tighter, their cold grip pulling Emily and John toward the center of the room. Emily's breath came in quick, panicked bursts, her mind scrambling for any way out of the nightmare. The walls seemed to pulse with the stranger's presence, each throb echoing in her chest. But then, a flicker of clarity broke through the fear. And quote, "You've invited me in," and quote, the words echoed in her mind. Could it be possible? Was there a way to reverse what they had done? The stranger, his form flickering like a flame on the edge of the wind, watched them struggle, his smile widening. "It's too late," he said, his voice filled with dark satisfaction. "You can't undo the invitation." Emily's eyes darted around the room, looking for anything, any sign, any hope. The fireplace. It was the one thing that felt untouched by the darkness. The fire had been warm, alive. Maybe it could be their way out. With all the strength she could muster, Emily tore herself from the grip of the shadows. She ran toward the fireplace, John close behind her. The flames danced as they reached for the hearth, casting an intense, warm glow across the room. She could feel the warmth, the life, returning to her body, pushing back the icy chill that had claimed the rest of the house. The stranger hissed, his red eyes narrowing in fury. "You can't fight me." But Emily didn't stop. She grabbed the fire poker from the hearth and thrust it into the flames. As the steel heated, she felt a surge of power in her hand. The stranger recoiled, his face twisting in pain. "This is our house," as she shouted, her voice steady with resolve. "You're not welcome here anymore." With a fierce cry, she lunged at the stranger, brandishing the fiery poker. The heat from the fire swirled around her, and as the poker made contact with the stranger's chest, his form shrieked, a terrible, guttural sound that rattled the very walls of the house. For a moment, the room was still. The firelight flickered and dimmed, and the shadows receded. The air, once heavy with malice, lightened. The stranger's figure began to unravel, as if he were nothing more than smoke and shadows, dissipating into the air. John rushed to Emily's side, pulling her into his arms. "It's over," he whispered, disbelief in his voice. The house groaned one final time, then fell silent. The storm outside began to subside, and the faint glow of dawn crept through the windows. The family was safe, at least for now. But Emily knew the truth. Whatever they had faced was far from over. And though the house had won this battle, there was always another darkness waiting, just beyond the edge of the light.
Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more. See you next time.